Welcome to the Beyond 3D podcast, where we explore all things 3D and the important role that 3D data plays throughout the manufacturing process, driving decisions throughout a product's lifecycle. Here, we talk with industry analysts, business owners, developers, and industry influencers, and hear real stories that you can relate to and learn from, and know which trends and technologies apply to your business. So join us as we go Beyond 3D. In this episode of Beyond 3D, Fritz, CEO of Techsoft3d, talks with 4 leaders of industry to discuss the future of work and the future of manufacturing in a post-COVID world.
Even though there was a little bit of email with introductions, a quick 1 or 2 minute introduction about yourself and about your company and what you do. And then we'll dive right into it and see where the conversation takes us. I'm going to go clockwise on how I see the screen. So Meghan, how about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Meghan West, and I am the CEO of CNC Software, and our flagship product is Mastercam. So if you're unfamiliar with Mastercam, it's the industry leader in the CAD/CAM space. So we drive CNC machine tools, and we are an indirect sales company. We've got about 215 employees, but then we've got over 100 direct resellers around the world. We're in over 80 countries. And then somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,000 agencies representing us. And that includes partners, resellers, sub-resellers, that kind of thing. Very excited to be here and nice to meet you all.
Great. How about you, Marc?
I'm Marc Lind. I'm the head of strategy for Aras. For those of you not familiar with Aras, we're a combination of executives and technologists from the other major providers in the PLM industry. Siemens, Dassault, PTC, doing next generation PLM, really innovating in the underlying platform to make it more scalable, flexible, and upgradable when it's heavily customized, which has been a real problem in the industry for a long time.
Gotcha. How about you, Sam?
Hi, QA. It's a quality management system. My background started a billion years ago, co-founder of a CAD/CAM company, Cimatron, probably you know the name, Meghan definitely as well. So we used to compete with Mastercam in Israel when, what is name? He has SolidCam today, whatever. Yeah, somebody solid there. As you hear my accent, so now you know I didn't born here in Israel. So I moved here about 20 years ago. And I managed Cimatron in Novi, Michigan, acquired Gipscom, you know Gipscom as well. Mm-hmm. And I did tons of lean manufacturing. And then I realized that after 20 some years, actually also PLM in between, I spun off in Israel and built Smart Team, which is now Enovia, you know it. So I found out that the quality industry is so backwards and so manual, chasing after manufacturing all the time. So I built this company about 8, 9, 10 years ago. We developed an engine that handled automated OCR, 2D print, and of course we moved to 3D. That's why I know the team at here. And we are growing very fast. We have a lot of customers today. In the last 3 years, more than 800 and something. So I believe we solved a big problem in this industry. We work very nicely with PLM, PDM, ERP system. So that's a great time to be in this industry, really making the change.
Mm-hmm. Digitizing. How about you, Max?
My name is Max Lobovsky, and I started Formlabs about 9 years ago now, and we make professional desktop 3D printers. So sorry for the background noise. There's some construction.
Some people building printers behind you.
Somebody big printer, right?
Not printers. They're built in China. Although we're building a lot of prototypes right now in the office. So 3D printers. They've been kind of $100,000 and up piece of capital equipment for most of their history. And we were the first company to make a professionally useful tool that's sort of a desktop, like one of these ones behind us, that costs a few $1,000s. And we're expanding into new types of printers and growing. And yeah, that's what we're up to.
Gotcha. And I'm Ron Fritz, CEO of Techsoft3d. We serve as strategic technology partners to companies like yours that are making software for engineering. And we, one of the things we realized a little while ago is that because we work with so many software teams across the industry, that sometimes it's great to bring those folks together to have interesting conversations in a forum that doesn't really exist otherwise. So we, when I was thinking about this conversation, I was trying to pull in a group of interesting and diverse people. I mean, Mastercam obviously is right there, very close to the shop floor, on the shop floor. And so you're quite familiar with what people are really doing. Same with Sam with High QA, but also the background with Cimatron, Marc and Aras. You know, Aras is, as you mentioned, in kind of next generation PLM system, working with big companies, medium companies, and small companies. And so they get to see what folks are doing and what trends are happening in manufacturing. And then Max, of course, is a perspective on additive, but the perspective, as he just mentioned, of somebody who actually has stuff manufactured. And so that'll be an interesting conversation. So far, I can tell already it's going to be less chaotic than the presidential debates last night. I'll be a moderator, and I hope I don't have to stop people from interrupting one another. Everyone here is pretty reasonable, and I think we'll
not use the same language, probably.
Yeah, that's right. And everybody here is kind of in the East Coast. Sam is in New Jersey, the Jersey Shore, an area I'm quite familiar with, having grown up in New Jersey. And then I think Megan, you're in Connecticut, is that right? And Max and Marc are in the Boston area. So definitely.
I actually grew up in New Jersey as well.
Oh, yeah.
Where in New Jersey?
In Union County and Westfield and New Providence.
Same. I grew up in Union County as well, Rahway and Roselle. Yeah, how about that? Well, the rest of you don't have to watch that trip down memory lane. We'll talk about that offline. So as I mentioned in the email to each of you, and as the starting conversation here, there's been a lot of conversation about and speculation about whether the supply chain whether the pandemic will cause the supply chain, which was so disrupted, to move. People will de-risk their supply chain and begin to manufacture things more in North America again and Europe again. And I'm interested to hear people's views on whether we think that is going to happen, that isn't going to happen, why not, and to what degree. And we don't need to go in any particular order. If somebody is something they're dying to say, jump right in.
I can start. No doubt that supply chain got big impact on because of the COVID-19. I think each one of us can bring example more than one. We want to release a Nissan car, 2 months ago, and they said, well, sorry, we don't have it. We are waiting. Should come from there, part coming from China, this coming from India, and it's like everything is stopped. And I think what will happen is like there is a first, I call it a psychology behavior by anybody. It said, okay, what we learn from this, we have to, instead of outsourcing, maybe insourcing and change the way we work today. But look, as long as the COVID-19, now talking about wave 2 or wave 1 didn't end yet. So, I mean, it will change to the extent, and people will try, or companies will try to find different suppliers close home. Once the COVID-19 will be vaccinated, then it will go away, not tomorrow. I don't believe in what this guy said yesterday, whatever he said. It's not going to happen in November. Maybe next November will be after that, but we have to live with it. That's the way we work, and that's the way we manage our business. You have to live with it, period.
Right.
It's going to be 6 months, 1 year, whatever the case, make sure you are ready. Now, for people who needs parts, they will try to find close home, but no matter what, the economy is impacted on this as well. So the demand is not as it was yesterday. I think generally speaking, everybody sees like 30, I would call it average 30% reduction in demand. So I think that it's not that, I mean, people are not buying, people are, part of them at home, part of them in not working. So, I mean, the pressure on the supply chain is not filling up inventory like crazy. It's like almost like just on time almost.
Right.
So there is a compromise in, hey, I don't care if my customer will wait another week or 2 weeks or 1 month, as long as I don't need to do it here, because it's going to cost me more. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be a combination, but I'm trying to get to the point that it's a people behavior psychology. Once COVID is gone, people will forget like it didn't happen. Right. And everybody will come back the same way we worked before, looking for cheap or affordable resources, and we'll go back to outsourcing. Now, what I think will happen and should happen, and everybody talks about Industry 4.0, Quality 4.0, what happened, and we experience it today, is that make sure in this time that there is much less pressure on your activities. Be ready, because it's going to go. We are not going to live with it forever. It's a temporary situation, not 1 month, probably 1 year, 1.5 years, and be ready. So I think what we experience is companies are putting more resources on technology, right, and being more efficient, cutting costs. So, okay, it's 30% quiet more, or in some cases 50% quiet more, and not everybody will go home. So what we're going to do now, you have time to think about your current process, how you're going to improve it. So there are pros and cons for this situation. The way I see it, people will come back to whatever they used to do before the COVID, and that's a psychology.
That makes sense. Thanks, Sam. What's your point of view, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of that. I think with manufacturing, the profit margins are so small that it's just such a price-sensitive industry. So, you know, regardless of the risk, I think manufacturers are always going to look for the lowest cost option. So whether that's China or whether that's, you know, outsourcing it or whether that's bringing it inside, I think it's going to depend on just what that lowest cost option is. I agree. I think there's a lot of companies right now that are focusing on improving efficiencies so that they can become a lot more competitive with their costs, which is great. I don't think that's going to happen overnight. I think it's going to take some time for them to implement, understand, train on this technology to help reduce costs. But I would love to see, you know, these American companies get to a point where they've implemented this technology in a way that it allows them to compete on price. Because I really think at the end of the day, that's where it's going to be. You know, if a manufacturer can save, you know, a certain percentage on supplies by going to another country, then they're going to do that regardless of the quality of it.
Of the risk, the real risk or the perceived risk will be secondary in their mind to the cost.
Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing.
Marc, what are you hearing out there with your customers?
Sure. Well, we have been hearing and seeing companies already beginning to think about how their supply chain is constructed, given the geopolitical tensions that have been occurring over the past 3+ years. The movement there was quite slow. It seems the pandemic is compressing or accelerating things that were already being contemplated. You wind up with really a confluence of factors here, both the political situation and the virus pandemic, that combined with the kind of macro trends that we're all familiar with, whether it's the smart connected products changing the dynamic in the the content of the asset or the product, whether you're talking about increasing levels of software and electronics and connectivity in the product, or the nature of the materials advancement and things like the additive manufacturing changing the way that you can distribute your manufacturing footprint. The depressed demand that was mentioned right up front, we're feeling like that has the potential to be, let's say, notched down for a while, right? Airlines not buying as many jets because people aren't doing as much travel, people not buying as many cars, people not building as many factories from the ground up. Now, the flip side of that is retooling, the looking for the efficiencies and the modernization. There is a fundamental rethink that is beginning to happen throughout the manufacturing world at the executive level, where you're looking at the allocation of capital, the right sizing of the workforce, and the real estate footprint. Where do I have factories? Where do I have dependencies? That is playing out right now. So these other factors that we've been talking about are basically the fuel for that fire, if you will.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. At the very beginning of the pandemic, the conversation was almost like, hey, should we be given political factors and the pandemic, should we really have so much manufacturing in China? And it wasn't very long before people realized, oh, this is actually a global situation. It doesn't matter where your manufacturing sits. It would have been impacted. And Max, you had mentioned that you guys have some or all of manufacturing in China. So you have a really on the ground point of view. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we actually have, for a small company, we have a pretty good diverse view of it, because we do our hardware manufacturing primarily in China through, it's not quite consumer electronics sort of supply chains, but close. Then our materials we actually make in our own plant in the US, in Ohio. Many of our competitors are sort of more industrial equipment made, local to where those companies are headquartered. So we sort of see these different parts, and each part has been affected pretty differently. I think the broadest view I have is that in general, COVID is accelerating most sort of forms of disruption in most industries. It's basically the software eating the world, more digital interfaces to everything. That's obviously the trend for decades, and still has decades left to go. And in most cases, outside of like specifically in travel or leisure or whatever, COVID is pushing those things along. So and when it comes to manufacturing, I think that's the case too, including outsourcing. I think this is long-term only going to accelerate those trends, because companies are learning to be less present on their manufacturing floors, even when they're in the same town. They're figuring out how to work without that, and that's the thing that obviously, high volume consumer goods have figured that out a long time ago, but sort of lower volume, more industrial goods, they're now figuring that out too, that like they can get by. There's some disadvantages, but those disadvantages are shrinking. So I think, I don't think manufacturing is coming back to the US in a big way on any time frame.
Any big scale, yeah. A couple people mentioned this accelerated digitization and how COVID basically took things that should have been happening and disrupted and accelerated that push, and that's affecting all industries, not just manufacturing. And then a couple people mentioned how you have time to rethink how you do things. You have a little bit of reduced demand, and you're maybe forced to rethink how you do some stuff that that's just the way we do it. That's just the way it's done in manufacturing. And now all of a sudden there's the impetus to change it. So let's look ahead, I don't know, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. What things, if this group got back together, what things would we laugh about? Like, remember the way it used to be done? Like, remember when phones used to be connected to a wall with a cord? Or remember when you used to have to get up and manually change the channel and there were only 4 TV channels? What are those things going to be in manufacturing? Like, remember when it's going to seem so ridiculous?
I think it's so interesting. So for those of you that don't know, my dad is the one that started the company. So he's got a lot of history on how manufacturing, how the whole process worked. And he always talked to me about how he would get orders on a fax machine, or when he first started, he would mail a letter to Japan and wait a few weeks for it to come back. And I kind of think trade shows is going to be one of those things, the idea of everybody spending all of this money and all of this time to go set up a booth for people to come, and meet with you. I think that's one of the things that's really going to change. We have shifted to virtual, and by that we've been able to reach a way larger audience. But I think the interesting part is that, my perspective on it is that I use the term permission. I think this has given us the permission to disrupt. Whereas if we were to be the only company to have pulled out of a trade show, even if we didn't think it was that valuable, our lack of presence there, I think, would have been seen as a negative by the rest of the industry or by competitors. It would have been, really drilled in on. But the fact that everybody is in the same position, I think it's given us this permission to disrupt and kind of an opportunity to really shake things up without a lot of the negative consequences or impacts that might have happened if we had disrupted not on a level playing field.
Right.
I think that's been a really interesting and positive part of this experience is allowing ourselves to really rethink and do things because they are the right things, not just because that's how we've always done them. So yeah, I think just kind of circling back, I think this idea of a lot of people getting together on one basis. I find the manufacturing industry in particular such a face-to-face industry. It's all about networking. I think because it's so small, everybody knows everybody. I go to a trade show and it's like a family reunion. It's you see the same people there year after year after year. Which is a wonderful part of it. But so I think we're going to still have to find a way to make those connections and strengthen those relationships in a different way.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about the kind of the competitive pressure to show up at these big trade shows. Some of you may remember Daratech, which went away a long time ago now. They faded away a long time ago, but there used to always be this annual pressure. And when we started at Techsoft in the late 96, you kind of had to be there to be considered real. And then once you were there, it was almost like a drug and you couldn't stop, because if you didn't show up again, suddenly everyone's wondering what's going on with them. I think they're in trouble. Your competitors start talking. Right. So, and I used to always look at that and think, if we could all just decide to stop coming, then this would all go away. But yet we're all paying the tithe in order to do it. And eventually, I'm not sure really what happened. I think a couple of big players got unhappy, pulled out, and that gave everyone else the cover to say, yeah, all right, we're out.
You guys should all stop going because you just sell software. But for us, the trade shows have a real function, because people do need to see our products. In fact, because we don't do much outside sales, it's the only way people see our products often. So.
Right.
Trade shows we're looking forward to those coming.
It's hard for your sales team to carry a printer around and the materials and plunk it down for a demo.
Well, that's kind of what our competitors do, but it's possible when there's a total of $10,000 or $20,000 you can spend selling the product. It's not possible when you spend $1,000 selling the product.
Yeah.
Well, trade shows and working remotely, this will be definitely one of the biggest change based on COVID. I can give example. My son is working in the city in Manhattan. They have like 150 people there, $1.5 million rent a year. COVID put everybody at home, and Sandy said, hey, we don't need it. It's like, we don't need it. So they are now going to sublease. Nobody is going back to the office. Now, when you were working in, in Ford on the assembly line. It might happen somewhere when robotics will take complete, control on our life. It will happen. But then we're talking about supply chain. So the assembly line is the last part, in making the assembled product. But even trade shows, and you mentioned Daratech, and I remember, IMTS used to be AutoFact,
right?
Like a couple of years ago. 1 year Detroit, 1 year Chicago. Now at least it's every 2 years. So IMTS canceled this year, but I did presentation for this IMTS last week, and we are having another big trade show remotely, virtually in Netherlands on October 13. So most probably trade show will become virtual. It's like you are there, but you are not there. So it become more of virtual reality that people can meet together. It's not a replacement or face-to-face and hey, I remember it for last year, and you put your booth, and I know exactly where Mastercam booth is in IMTS. It's like exactly where I know exactly, because every year it's in the same place.
It's the booth with all the big crowds. That's the one. That's how you can tell.
And you see people in your left side, on your right side. Hi, how are you? Like, hey, stories for the last 2 years.
Right.
That's going to change probably, but it's time to change, no doubt about it.
Well, Max, if trade shows aren't the thing for you, like if that's the way you sell, what other things you think won't go back?
So I think my comment earlier was not that they aren't going to change, but just that for us it is like it is a valuable part of how we sell. But yeah, I would say it's also an example of where it's accelerating disruption. In general, we rely much less on in-person sales than our competitors, they rely on networks of resellers that are doing mostly outside sales, and we figure out how to sell similar stuff through mostly inside sales. But we have like a couple pieces because it's a physical product, and not just like a physical product, it's a physical product that makes more physical things. So showing people the artifacts is fairly important. So we rely on like a couple of key points where we show people the artifacts. One is trade shows, and that one's hurt, but another big one that we've continued, going really strong on is sample parts. So we just send out tons and tons of sample parts.
What about you, Mark? What do you think we're going to look back on and go, that was crazy that we used to do it that way before we rethought it?
So we believe that the nature of supply chain collaboration is going to be under pressure here because of the pandemic and the remote work from home type of scenarios that we're all seeing. The lack thereof of true online collaboration has been a real problem for years and years and years. And the answer is things like Citrix or, manual workarounds and that type of thing, which in the environment, especially if this continues for a prolonged period, even with the vaccine, is not going to enable the type of progress on next generation products that's necessary to compete. And so the companies that actually get out in front of this and are able to put in place better collaboration mechanisms in the design, development, engineering phase, where there's co-design going on, the coordination of the various different disciplines, and then the respective release and interface with the manufacturing plants and the suppliers that are feeding those are all going to become critical. And the visibility in the factory, I think, one of the things that we'll look back on in 10 years and say, wow, I can't believe it was that way. There's been a lot of data being collected for years and years and years in factory settings. doesn't get as much analysis as it probably is due. Mm-hmm. And there's been a lot of management by walking around, if you will, as the let's say layout of the factory is already being changed for social distancing to keep personnel and the lower levels of personnel inside the factory walls. As that moves to virtual, it's going to become self-evident that you need to have the type of data feeds, the type of KPIs and whatnot that are necessary to operate in a remote setting. Everybody's been talking about it for a long time. It has always been, say, the next big thing, but you just don't see it truly materializing. I like to say, people talk about the smart factory. I see a lot more factory than smart.
Mm-hmm. You really want to take me there?
In terms of?
Because we are much involved in this. My presentation was about, smart factory is kind of a subset of Industry 4.0, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah.
And talking about smart factory on the manufacturing side, let's say it's like, I don't know, in number 10, if you look into mm-hmm. the quality side, is -5. Because when you talk about it, and this is where, and I don't want to talk about, product and sales, but the biggest problem in the supply chain that you mentioned, and we are much involved in it, is I call it the interpretation. Like you start with OEM that propagate job to tier 1 and 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then OEM has no clue who is making his part. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's something that not surprise you probably, right? Mm-hmm. And then the way of OEM communicate the requirement of a part or an assembly, it's like now they move to MBD, model-based definition, and that's one of the reasons I'm here and we are. And then I'm talking about, okay, model-based definition. Do you know, Mr. Designer, how this part going to be made? What operation going to be happen? How it's going to be inspected? He has no idea. Mm-hmm. Now they are providing MBD with limited dimension or critical dimension, and now customers are struggling like crazy to do reverse engineering, spending more time, more interpretation, more assumption.
They're so far removed. Mm-hmm.
I'm not surprised that 1,700 engineers of Boeing visiting daily basis suppliers to make sure they do the things right. And you ask yourself, why is that? Now they're going to visit less because they cannot fly or they cannot visit. So we are there. We understand this issue. And again, I don't want to get deeply into the relationship, but this is why we are working with Hoops. And we took this, call it model-based definition mystery, mm-hmm. and converted it to a knowledge, really how to make the part. Otherwise, it's even become worse. And we're talking about, virtual reality, the smart factory. Actually, the OEM make you more stupid than you was before because they give you less information to make what they want. They mm-hmm. think they save, 30, 40% of the time not creating drawings. And actually somebody's making drawings to make the part.
Right.
I don't see a guy in the shop floor doing roughing, and I know what is roughing, of course, and using 3D model orientation and rotate it. There's not enough information to do it there. So
I think a very basic thing people don't seem to get, I'm sure this group understands it, but a very basic thing that people don't understand about drawings today is not a way to primarily about transmitting the geometry information. It's primarily human readable overview of what's important about the part that's being made that conveys all kinds of other information. And I would love to kill drawings. We waste a ton of time making drawings, and our printers live in a world that's free of drawings, so it's possible. But I think step or non-drawing systems need they need to account for the human readable part of it, and you sort of do need a document. It doesn't have to look like a drawing, but you need a document to go along with the geometry data.
Geometry, you don't need drawing. Geometry, you need CAD model. I don't need anything, but geometry is not enough. You have a lot of GD&T and the description about how to make the part, the true position.
Yeah.
I'm coming from the 3D, trust me. In 1989, I've been in Chicago. It was a STEP conference in a very nice place. And the guy from STEP said, in 2 years, nobody will use drawing anymore.
Right.
Here we are.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
So it's not going to go because yet it's not practical. For geometry, and I agree with you, by the way, when you talk about 3D printing, you don't start from a block and make a part. You start from the raw material to make a part. So it's a different way of making parts. And so...
Yeah. Megan, it looked like when Max was making his point about 2D that you have a point of view on this too. I get the sense that you agree. What are you think?
Yeah, I mean, I just think in general, the manufacturing industry, I mean, you're getting that next generation of users, and there, like you guys said, there's so much more collaboration. So the requirement of more information, the more rich that data is, the easier it is for somebody to take something, understand the context behind it, and turn it into a reality. Without all of that information, it's so difficult to pass a part or anything on without someone having a lot of questions or trying to understand it. And it's all about making it more effective, more efficient, and everyone wants that easy button. How do I just press go and make it happen?
Parts are getting smaller, much more complicated. You don't want to do on an assembly line. I mean, iPhone assembly in 20 seconds. You cannot do today with screws for 2 hours assembling iPhone. So now it's point click. So it's, looking into, 747, 800, the new series, 6 million parts, 737, 400,000 parts. What happened?
Yeah.
So somebody needs to make them, inspect them. They are getting crazy, smaller, much tighter tolerance. So the information on the model or on the geometry is much more detailed than it is supposed to be. If I'm making a cup, who cares? But if I need to be part of 80 parts assembly, hey, you should be very, very, very tight tolerance accurate there. So
yeah, for sure. Well, it's interesting that nobody said, as we look back at what things will seem silly, no one said that we used to do drawings. Everyone has now kind of settled in that drawings are going to, whoever said that in 1989 was spectacularly wrong. Oh, Mark has a point of view. Maybe.
Well, I was going to add on to that, which is, in 10 years, are we going to say, oh, it was so silly, the interop problem, that nothing worked with anything else, right? I mean, part of the hitch between not just the collaboration component, but the seamless flow of data from the engineering world into the manufacturing and quality world is the
compatibility.
Tool not designed to actually have the data be accessible, available, and compatible with whether it's the machines on the floor or the other tools downstream that people are using in the supply chain. And you just wind up with the requirement to redo work because of the incompatibilities. The vendors are hoping they're going to force people to switch, right? And it's not happening, right? This is the same problem for 30 plus.
Right.
Well,
you are very modest saying 30 plus. Since outsourcing started, very plus.
Right.
I think that's a really good point, that I think everybody used to work in such a silo and very protective of their data. It was all just very kept under wraps. But now, for us, our biggest focus is working with partners and making sure that there's that compatibility with other processes within the manufacturing process, because we're just one small piece of it. And if we can't play well with others, our users are not going to be very happy.
Right.
Our working hypothesis on the direction that things need to head is not only is there a diverse set of heterogeneous tools today, but that's accelerating and expanding because of new breakthroughs in technologies and new capabilities. And you need to be able to, this is our play, right? To have a platform layer that has open connectivity where you can bring data together so that you can collaborate, not just within the four walls, but down through the supply chain and out in remote settings, and enable new technology insertion as new capabilities emerge. I mean, how is AI ever going to be effective if the data are locked up and incompatible? And the machine learning algorithms need access to large sets of data without impediment. And it needs to be across various different areas and tools. Not seeing it today, that's one of the problems that we're fundamentally trying to solve here at Aras.
Yep.
So this is a nice layer of describing the quality 4.0, industry 4.0. Everything is connected, which is great. And it adds another layer when you talk about connectivity. And I'm going to quote some of our very large customers in France. And I visited there last year when we could fly yet. They're not getting 2 weeks in quarantine. And he said, look, before we use your product, I can tell you, I had a lot of data, but I don't have information when I need it. That's it.
Right.
So
that, you can't
generate tons of data, and then it goes to folder A and folder B and folder hard copies and whatever it is. And I said, what I'm going to do is this data when I need it.
Right.
So it's not just about the connectivity, it's about how I can utilize this data when I need it to take decision at the right time. I call it prevention, like not just making parts and then after my lot is ready, I said, oops, I have a problem here. I would like to prevent. So that's kind of the connectivity. When we talk about it, it's also having information when I need it to get the right decision at the spot.
Well, I think we just about used up the time that I said we would use, 45 minutes, but any other last thoughts beyond Sam's? Anything any point you wanted to make, Max, that you didn't have a chance to say?
No, I'm just mostly curious to hear everyone else's perspective. So thank you all for sharing it.
How about you, Mark?
I would just finish by saying the points that we've discussed, one around collaboration and remote, two about reorganization of the supply chains and changing responsibilities in the associated with the different levels of value that the supply chain is delivering up the value chain, and three about the interoperability and the ability to bring lots of different disparate data together. I mean, those core challenges are the obstacles that you have to get out of the way in order to then realize the redefinition of the supply chain, the redistribution of the work for, changing product composition. And really that's the digital thread, if you will, type of traceability that's necessary for the future scenarios. And I mean, we think that's the opportunity for manufacturers to really change the way they're operating so that they're able to take advantage of new breakthroughs in technologies and deliver more value for their customers, ultimately improving margins and profitability.
Gotcha. How about you, Megan? Any last thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of it, really, it's about the user's experience and the fact that they have to work with so many different products and pieces to get the job done. It's our job to figure out how to improve our piece of that experience and making sure that at the end of the day, it's seamless from start to finish. So I think all of that technology, all of these opportunities, it's really driven by that end goal of improving that experience.
Makes sense. That's great. Speaking of experience, this was a great experience. I'll be sure to be calling on you all again once there's another topic that you have something to contribute to. But thanks a lot for joining the conversation. Great bunch of folks. And I look forward to being back to the point where we can meet in person.
That would be great.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Beyond 3D podcast, hosted by Techsoft3d. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and leave us a review, or subscribe on SoundCloud. To listen to past episodes or learn more about Techsoft3d, visit www.techsoft3d.com/blog. Send us comments and suggestions at info@techsoft3d.com. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you'll join us again on the next episode of Beyond 3D.